All right, excellent. And we are live, and today I'm with one of our speakers for Control the Room this year. I'm really excited to be here with you and welcome Um,
Hi.
so awesome. Really looking forward to your talk because it falls in the category of the types of talks that get really excited about sharing and telling people about because it's a bit orthogonal to the methods or the types of things that people typically seek out when they're thinking about learning about facilitation. It's those
Mm.
adjacent things, those mindsets and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm also really excited. So, my partner and I are going to be facilitating the conversation and the talk at Control the Room. But what part of it is that we are primarily filmmakers, and we are bringing in our craft and our art into the room, and how that um, how we can bring the way that we observe, how that informs where we pay attention and where we point the camera ultimately, and how we engage with the other person through the camera. And we're just really excited to bring that methodology to Control the Room.
Yeah, 100%. And that's in line with what we have prepared to talk about today too, which is how, your approach to facilitation or how facilitation shows up for you is through that lens of facilitating your own programs and just through the filmmaking.
Yeah, I for me it's always about how do I make this more artful? I
Mm.
think is really my approach to how do I instill more creativity, and how do I bring an art-based approach to the way that we are thinking, the way that we are talking, the way that we are talking to each other, because ultimately I believe we're all artists, we're all young artists. And how do I activate that part of ourselves in the way that we approach designing, or how do we approach thinking about product or even HR? And it's really about kind of activating what is inside and what is intrinsic in order to play with what's in our prefrontal cortex, and kind of what we're used to um, thinking with nowadays.
Yeah, it really struck me just a moment ago when you were kind of introducing yourself to the audience around this story that a filmmaker friend of mine told, and he said it was when he was in film school. He went on a trip
Hmm.
and to work on a film. He was like, I guess, interning, if you will,
Mhm.
and he was with a well-known film crew and director, and he was shocked that they got there and didn't film anything the first day,
Mm, mhm,
and then the second day they didn't film anything.
mhm.
And then the third day they didn't film anything, and he was like, "Why we're not filming anything? Aren't we? Isn't that what we're here for? What's going on?" And there's the experienced filmmakers had this belief that the minute they pulled out the camera, everything would change. And if they
Mhm.
didn't facilitate a relationship, if they didn't build rapport before, they wouldn't know what to film because they hadn't observed enough to know what the story is. And as you were talking about taking an artful approach, I think it's hard to take an artful approach if we haven't observed and listened and honored what's there.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely believe in that. And a big part of it is that, are you a foreign filmmaker coming into a community and immediately saying, this is the story that I have in my head, and this preconceived notion that I have in my head, and therefore this is what I'm going to film. And that controls what you pay attention to. That immediately filters the data and the information that is going through your eyes, and therefore the cameras. And that is intrusive, and that is really just not taking a very humanized approach. So, and I think the same can applies for facilitation. So, what are you sensing about this group of people? Getting to know the group of people. Like, for example, when we filmmake, we try as much as possible to obviously introduce ourselves, understanding that we are bringing ourselves into this process and we are coming into an already established community. And do we sit around in circle and listen to everybody first? Do we what sensing or what research are we responsible for before we even land in the land in this set or this site or in the facilitation room? What are we learning about the people with whom we are going to interact with?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head around having this lens around learning. Like, are
Mm,
we even in that mode of being willing to or receptive to learn about them and what they're going through, or do we have a preconceived notion around what the solution is? I feel like that's the difference between consulting and facilitation.
mhm.
We're just going to come in and like give our prescribed solution, or are we going to help extract it as facilitators?
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to fall into to almost lean back and, after one or two conversations in your initial sensing or interviews with clients to be like, "Oh, I guess it's this." I assume it's like a miscommunication with top level executives and different teams, and therefore it's this workshop or this activity that I think is going to do it without really taking a step back and being like, is that actually this is my first initial hunch or from, these bits of data that I have, but is it actually really the thing that is at the core of it that is why what I'm trying to figure out?
Yeah, and you mentioned a couple of times now the word sensing, and it kind of ties back to something we talked about in the pre-show chat around somatic awareness and
Mhm.
how much your practice is informed by somatic awareness. And if we turn off that lens, if we don't allow ourselves to sense what's happening in the room, and we're just saying, "Hey, here is this activity or this workshop or this thing that I've decided it's going to work," then we lose that ability to adapt on the fly, which can often backfire.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So I think, and I'm a very somatic leaning person. Like I've learned that I intake data first with my body, right, as opposed to my brain, and which I think a lot of us and a lot of people have learned to mostly just trust our brains. But I initially first sense with my body because your body is your oldest organ. It's developed hundreds of years before your prefrontal cortex. So it has more data and has more wisdom than your brain. So learning as facilitators to first listen to our own bodies and be like, okay, this is what I think is right. But my intuition, which is another way of knowing, but also then what are the signals that I'm getting from my body?
Mhm.
Is it this, something feels off? And then also learning to apply that to to as a facilitator, bringing the whole group into a somatic awareness. So really allowing time to have everybody slow down because everybody is just very quick for a solution, or it's easy to like jump into a game because we want people to play or we want people to engage into an activity, but really it's about, okay, we're here. Now let's slow down and allow our bodies to be attuned to the rhythm of our breath. And as soon as we do that, then we can feel and sense our bodies. And from there, all of us can show up in a much more present way, in a much different way, so that you yourself can say, okay, I, as a facilitator, am, wow, I'm really tired today, but I know that I still have to do
Mhm.
this. But this is the way that I'm, understanding that and accepting that in your body. But then also allowing space for the 10 or 30 or 100 people in the room to say, oh, actually, I'm carrying something else in myself, but I'm still going to choose to show up to these activities. But allowing that, I think, even just a minute to allow yourself to slow down your heart rate
Mm.
and allow everybody to be present in the room the way that they would want to be.
I keep coming back to this idea of being hijacked. And
Mm,
you were referring to slowing down the heart rate, and sometimes that could be an internal thing we're bringing to the room because
mm,
something that just happened. Did we just have a heated conversation with our partner,
mhm,
or a coworker, or is there some heat in the room that's
mm.
hijacking us, right? It could come from many different places, but if we don't acknowledge it, name it, like look at it, take time for it to settle, then we will be hijacked. And I love this, your point around let it just settle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because sometimes I find that when I facilitate a room and you allow people, an opportunity to share or talk, so often we do check-ins
Mm.
at the beginning of, any workshop or any meeting that we do. People are really happy to talk. uh, as soon as you just kind of like say, these are the agreements, we listen, you talk, you share a talking piece. I have a talking piece on my desk that's for these kinds of virtual meetings, but it's easy. I mean, I think the question that we are always thinking about is how do you allow space for people to show up, but then allow for that to say, this is what it contain it into that space, and then not allow that in turn to hijack the whole meeting or workshop.
Mm. Yeah, containers are really powerful, right? Because they can create boundaries for ourselves to protect ourselves. They can create the boundaries, like you say, to not like encroach on the rest of the meeting. They can also help people understand why you're asking them to do this crazy thing that they don't quite understand, right? It's just like, or this sounds like some silly thing that someone else had me do that was a waste of time. But if we use the container to frame it, then maybe they're more willing because now they understand it. The narrative is more clear to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when you first allow everybody to slow down and take a breath, and then I believe that that in turn has them be more open.
Mm,
And when, you can feel in a room when somebody is closed off. You can feel it if somebody is like very resistant to the activity or what you're wanting to do, but I think allowing space for everybody to crack open a little bit and to be open, in the way that somebody else's openness affects you and therefore allows you to be a little bit more open. So I do believe in that. Like you said, containers are so important, and how do I contain so that everybody feels a sense of trust and a sense of safe risk? Because actually, sometimes asking people to slow down is a little bit of a scary thing.
yeah.
Not everybody is used to that, and not everybody and everybody has a different relationship to breathing. I think,
Mm,
I one of the lessons that I've taken away, is that when we do yoga or meditation, we actually don't tell people how to breathe, or we don't, um, kind of count for them, because everybody has a different breath pattern, and breathing for some people is extremely safe, whereas breathing for other people can be a little bit different. And so part of it is just allowing people to attune at their own pace and at their own level, but therefore, once that happens, everybody can feel a little bit more safe and can therefore be open to any activities that are coming up for the rest of the design day or workshop.
yeah, I like that. Giving people space to kind of show up in whichever way they feel most comfortable, but still encouraging it. So there's some synchronicity around the experience. That we are getting some oxygen. We are taking a moment just to slow down our limbic system. It's
Yeah.
happening, but we're not like enforcing so much protocol that people veer into like what they might feel foreign or scary.
Yeah, and then in turn it gives them that space because, we also in our programs do what we call slow to sprints, because I'm sure your friend, the first 3 days he didn't film, but the last 3 days it was a literal sprint
Yeah,
because, you have to film at the right time, you have interviews, you have all of these things, and then it becomes, wow, we're going very fast.
yeah.
And And how do you balance those slow to sprints, and how do you balance, at the beginning we're allowing you time and space to attune to yourself and to rest and to be here, because later on we're going to be doing very vigorous activity, or either physical activity or play, or like cognition, so people are generating ideas, and then that's tired. But it's really, I think, learning to balance the two, and then allowing space for rest, and allowing space for reflection. um, so it's really hitting that equilibrium.
Yeah, balance is so key and so important. And wow, it's gotten my gears turning, especially around, I hadn't thought about that story in a while. And, it's making me think about how, the filmmaker, it's really important for them to know the essence of how someone in some other culture or some other place or just some other perspective is doing a thing that they're interested in highlighting or celebrating. And you if you don't know the approach or how they do that thing, then you can't ask them to do it. You can't, hey,
Mm,
remember when you folded this thing over your finger and then looped? That was really fascinating. Can you do that so I can capture it? You can't even ask them for that stuff unless you know they're capable of doing it or know they even do it. And I think
mhm,
that is pretty profound realization for leaders, that you can't ask your team to do the amazing things
mhm,
they can do unless you know they can do them.
mhm. Yeah, and if they feel safe doing it, or feeling. Oh, and then we get into conversations about, like, needs, and about, people's strengths and when
Yeah.
to recognize. It's just, yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's layered, and, I think that, to me, that's the next generation of leaders. It's all about being attuned to what, how to unleash people and create situations for thriving and doing their best work, not not a lot of the things that we've seen in the past. And it's
Mm,
especially now that we're more virtual and hybrid and stuff. So everything you're talking about around these kind of techniques for filmmaking and just how that aligns with facilitation, I think very much aligned with where leadership needs to go as well.
yeah, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited as, in our generation and even beyond, younger leaders who are really integrated human beings, who I think traditionally the workforce is like, well, you're this at work and then you're this in your everyday life. But
Mhm.
especially because, again, pandemic, and everyone's been forced to have a different kind of way of being, that I'm really excited for how people show up, and how we kind of unlearn ourselves to show up as more integrated human beings. So how do you bring, what lessons from knitting or baking bread or any of these, like, whole things that all of us as humans love and have been doing for centuries, and bring it into the workplace? And how do we, as facilitators, integrate these different modalities to also allow people to, yeah, ignite people and have them thrive in different ways.
Wow, that's interesting. That's some real wisdom, and an amazing place for us to hit the pause for today and let people kind of think about how these things that we do that have become rituals for cultures and
Mm,
for generations, how learning from those things and uh, how they might impact the way we collaborate and not be so compartmentalized about the what work is and isn't. I love it. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure chatting, and we'll talk more soon.
yeah, thank you so much. Have a wonderful